marine mammals, the whales, whether it's humpback whales, whether it's gray whales, whether it's dolphins, they show this propensity to be curious and to be friendly, as we often call them, like the friendly gray whales. And I think these are big brained, highly social mammals that are curious. And we see it by them coming to our boat, looking up at us. If we're in the water, they'll often come over. They're not, they'll come close to you with your eye or watch from a distance. And, we see this kind of looking and whether we and gazing and approaching. And I think that's a very interesting way of thinking about curiosity. They seem to be interested and learning more about us. He found our boat and he pushed his belly against the side of our boat, this big humpback, and looked up at us with this big wet eye. And those of us on the boat who had been involved in the rescue, it included government officials. We all looked back with really wet eyes. We were all just crying. And we all felt that this whale understood something about what we tried to do, that we were there to help him. And at the time I thought, wow, did he really, even though it felt like that, am I being too soft on this? Am I over-interpreting this? And that would suggest he had some theory of mind or some sense of empathy. At that time, we hadn't heard these stories coming in about whales, about humpbacks showing possible empathy by.
Because you'd also say there's an element of inventiveness, of creating information that wasn't there before, which you see, for example, in play.
Well, that's a whole other thing. I'm glad you're bringing up play because one of the earlier papers we did at my lab showed the first evidence that dolphins create their own objects of play. Most animals play, and it's beneficial for animals, young animals, to be playful, and adults play as well. But we actually showed that dolphins will produce these beautiful rings. They look like silver rings of air that they can take a position. In our case, they took a position at the bottom of the pool and popped their head up and blew this beautiful ring of air and then watched it as it went up, as it rose to the surface. It was the first time I used my video camera. I was very lucky. And I sort of I looked at it and I went, wow. And then this dolphin, Shiloh, went back down to the bottom of the pool and she blew another ring of air, watched it rise, blew a second ring that met the first ring and opened into a hoop, and she swam through it. We watched dolphins blowing these rings, and then another dolphin would come and take a piece of fish from the bottom of the pool and put it in it, and it would spin around. And the 5 dolphins were all watching it. It reminded me of a bunch of scientists watching, sort of doing an experiment. They're very curious. They test the contingencies. They're very much like us in that respect. These are large, complex brains these animals have. So when I'm trying to understand what they're doing with these brains, and all we can do, because we can't see inside their heads, we look at behavior as a reflection. So again, when I say that, all puns intended, I've also used mirrors to study these magnificent minds. And we did the first study showing that dolphins were the first species other than primates. We know we use mirrors to view ourselves. We know we can use them as tools. It had been shown 40 years before we did our study that our closest relatives, the great apes, also share this capacity. Monkeys don't seem to show it, at least not spontaneously without training. But then we decided to try it with dolphins. Again, separated from primates, us and other primates, apes, gorillas, orangutans, for the same amount of time, 97 to 100 million years. And they showed the strikingly similar patterns of behavior we saw. Many years later, we did it with elephants, and we recently did it with the beluga whale, showed mirror self-recognition. But the one eye-opener for me and my colleagues was we asked the question, at what age would dolphins show mirror self-recognition? Do you know how old young children are when they first show it? Do you think it's like a couple of months? Do you think it's 18 to 24 months when children start recognizing, hey, that's me in that mirror. Well, what's interesting about dolphins is they're on a very advanced trajectory developmentally, and they start socializing. They have to hit the water swimming right away as soon as they're born. They have to keep up with the group, and their moms are with them and the rest of the group. So they're socially interactive. They have advanced motor skills much earlier than children, and they also and they were they and we speculated that because, and also they show empathy at an early age. So for human children, when they show mere self-recognition, they're socially aware. They are starting to show empathy for others around them, and they had the same. So we looked at the same markers in dolphins, and it turned out that they showed it much earlier than children. We tested a dolphin that was started when she was, I think, 4 months or 5 months of age. She showed it by the time she was 7 months of age. And then we started looking at this with a dolphin that was already 15 months of age, and he showed it when we started. So you have to expose them to a mirror and give them a chance to understand what their behavior looks like. They test the contingencies, but they showed it much younger than children. So this is showing, again, these similarities. Not that they're smarter; they're on an advanced developmental path, but that they also are so much like us in those ways.
Yes, and when you use the image of the mirror and the mirror test, in the last chapter of your book, you use mirror in another way in the epigraph to that chapter, which is from an anthropologist that you admire very much. And that epigraph has to do with um, the transformation of seeing ourselves reflected in another living creature.
Yes, very much. And I think it makes us look at how we're treating those animals as well. Who are we, and how are we relating to these animals? How do we see others, and how do we try to protect them? You know, we think about ourselves often as being at the pinnacle of this evolutionary tree. And again, historically, we've thought, again, we're humans and other and animals. It's humans and other animals. And all those humans and other animals, we're up all together at the pinnacle of our evolution, of all of our evolutions. And I don't know that for me, we hold this mirror up to ourselves and say, how are we treating these others we share the planet with? So much of my work that I try to do is not to convince people of this. I'm trying to learn myself about these animals, but I think it's my responsibility to share what we learn. They can't speak for themselves. So as a scientist, I try to write science papers, but I also try to do public science communication to share what we're learning about them, so others will have this increased appreciation and empathy for these animals that also show empathy. And and for me, it's been an honor to be able to work with them and do this kind of work.
I think the epigram that begins your last chapter um, has the image of uh, we understand ourselves when we can see ourselves in the eye of another creature. And so now I'm wondering, how would you apply that to seeing yourself in the eye of a dolphin?
Well, again, I can't get into an animal's mind, okay? But when you think about it, and you think about some of the things that and I'm not going to say just me, I'm going to say how might dolphins see us humans in another way? So we our humans react very differently to dolphins all over the world, correct? So I can't answer that question for any one dolphin. If I'm answering a question about a dolphin approaching me in the ocean and I'm being respectful, they may they may see me one way. If it's an animal that I've interacted with and they're interacting, I've told you some narratives about how a Circe reacted to me, how other animals have reacted with this. Um, if I'm someone capturing dolphins, and pulling a calf from its mother, how might we be viewed then? If we're in a Japanese dolphin hunt, I've tried to stop these dolphin drive hunts in Japan. I've spent much of my career trying to raise public awareness of the fact that these animals are being slaughtered in Japan. How might those animals look at humans? How are we protecting their environment now? Right now, there are bills. Now I'm putting my advocacy hat on again, but one foot of mine is in the world of advocacy as a scientist saying, this is what we've learned about these animals. What are we doing? How do we treat these others on our planet? And right now, in our own, we have a congressional bill pending that's threatening to weaken the Marine Mammal Protection Act from 1972 that protects these animals from harassment, that tries to minimize entanglement in nets, which is a huge threat to these animals in their world. And our Congress and our current administration is pulling back on this so that we can do increased oil and gas drilling in places all over around our country. How would those animals be viewing us if they understood what we were doing? So I want to throw it back that way because right now there's deep concern about those animals and protecting their environment. And I hope that the work that my colleagues and I do by showing who these animals are will inspire others to think we've got to give them protection. How would we feel if that was happening in our environment? Because that is our environment too. It is our environment too. We share that with them. So again, it's a difficult time right now for these animals in their environment. There's a lot of noise pollution. There are a lot of ship strikes. There's a lot of entanglement. And as a scientist, I feel like it's my responsibility to, again, today, even on the show, to talk about this because it's lovely to be able to work with them and study them. And it's fabulous to be able to do the basic research. But if it doesn't make a difference in terms of what we can do to protect them, it's very frustrating.
Um, we've talked about types of relationships um, that we call empathy or compassion. And I want to ask you about another type of relationship and the possibilities there, and that's curiosity. Curiosity as a relationship. Uh, you being curious about dolphins, dolphins being curious about you. And I'm distinguishing a type of curiosity that um, is is kind of pure interest for the sake of interest. It doesn't. It's not a curiosity to be able to manipulate or to get some sort of reward for that curiosity. So, working with that kind of a definition, um, and you understanding your own curiosity about dolphins. And I think it goes beyond science. I think it goes beyond, oh, I need to publish a paper on this. I need to advance my career. I will use dolphins as objects to advance my career for me to get more pay in a university. You, you know, what
No,
you're doing is obviously far beyond that, and your curiosity is going beyond the limits of science, what you need to know as a scientist. So I imagine I understand that in you. Um, and so I'm asking about curiosity as a relationship and asking you um, if you thought dolphins were curious about you and curious in the same way or curious in a different way.
well, again, I can't ask them. I can just look at their behavior, like we keep on saying. And I'm going to broaden this beyond dolphins. I think in general, marine mammals, the whales, whether it's humpback whales, whether it's gray whales, whether it's dolphins, they show this propensity to be curious and to be friendly, as we often call them, like the friendly gray whales. And I think these are big brained, highly social mammals that are curious. And we see it by them coming to our boat, looking up at us. If we're in the water, they'll often come over. They're not, they'll come close to you with your eye or watch from a distance. And, we see this kind of looking, and whether we and gazing and approaching. And I think that's a very interesting way of thinking about curiosity. They seem to be interested and learning more about us. I know one of my colleagues, who I'm currently working with, she was actually the first doctoral student in my lab. Brenda McCowan and her colleagues published a very interesting paper where people have reported when they're whale watching, often humpbacks will come up to the boat. They, again, humpbacks and gray whales often are, will come up to the boat. And why are they coming up to the boat? Why do they keep doing this? People make a big fuss of them often. Sometimes they get rubbed. Sometimes people go, whoa, and start, oh, look at this. And they've report lots of different groups who've observed this have noticed often they'll do this big bubble ring. If you remember, a big bubble burst or a bubble ring. And they're wondering, is this some kind of response that the whales are doing? How did it start? But it's been reported. And that's, to me, really an interesting finding, because it makes me wonder from studies I've seen, these animals their closest living relatives are even-toed ungulates, like deer, sheep, goats. And when land animals are surprised, often they'll blow a big puff of air. We call it displacement behavior. And in the water, if they're at all tense, if there's any tension around it, it could turn into a bubble. That's how dolphins produce these bubble rings that we first reported, okay, that are used for play. And it makes me wonder when I read about that they see all of this. And again, the scientists aren't drawing this conclusion. They're just saying these bubble rings are often produced when these whales are approaching the boat. And I keep on thinking, well, maybe they were surprised at one point where people started sort of paying attention and they blew this ring and it got reinforced because people made a big fuss of it. Again, these are mysteries to us. We can't go back in time and say, how did it start? But more and more scientists are watching these animals in these kinds of encounters and starting to report these kinds of behaviors. Many, many years ago, I want to go back to one other thing. Many, many years ago, we did a rescue in Northern California. A big humpback whale that was called Humphrey wandered into San Francisco Bay. My first chapter of the book was about Humphrey. And I was a scientist doing rescue with the local marine mammal center when I had my lab. And this again he wandered in through the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm not going to go through the whole tale, but we worked to try to get him out of the bridge. And I did the first successful playback, playing feeding sounds to Humphrey to attract him to our boat. And he eventually followed us out through the Golden Gate Bridge. It's very unusual to get a whale to respond to playback like that. We were extremely lucky. And and he wound up going in the wrong direction at the very end of this. He was heading south in a southern migration with other whales. He zips into San Francisco Bay, starts going inland, about 60 miles inland. We finally get him out, and he heads the wrong direction. And we had this whole flotilla of boats around us, boats that were the same size as ours, boats that were bigger than ours, and we're outside of the Golden Gate Bridge. And Humphrey has disappeared northward, the wrong direction. And we all sort of did this sigh of, oh, not again. This is terrible. He's probably going to come back in. And he suddenly bypassed all the boats where we haven't seen him for about 10 minutes. And suddenly he pops up at the side of our boat. Our boat looked like all these other little boats. We didn't have a speaker hanging down any longer. All the boat engines were off. There was no acoustic cue to say it was our boat. He found our boat, and he pushed his belly against the side of our boat, this big humpback, and looked up at us with this big wet eye. And those of us on the boat who had been involved in the rescue, it included government officials. We all looked back with really wet eyes. We were all just crying. And we all felt that this whale understood something about what we tried to do, that we were there to help him. And at the time I thought, wow, did he really, even though it felt like that, am I being too soft on this? Am I over-interpreting this? And that would suggest he had some theory of mind or some sense of empathy. At that time, we hadn't heard these stories coming in about whales, about humpbacks showing possible empathy by intervening to protect these animals that were getting attacked by orcas. And as I hear these stories, um, it gives you wonder. It makes me feel maybe he really did understand this. We're in the infancy of our studies with these animals. We can't ask them how they feel. We can only watch and collect information, put it together. But to me, I think we have sufficient information now, more than sufficient, that we know we need to protect them. We know enough knowing we need to protect them and their environment. Finally, I'll just say this, and then is that one of the things that I think marks perhaps the way I work is I try to partner with the dolphins. If I'm working with a dolphin or an elephant, I do that as well, but less frequently. But we'll focus with dolphins. I try to give them a voice and try to see what they'll do, what their ways are, rather than training them to do things or asking them to do certain things. I give them things to see reflections of their minds and their types of intelligence.